All right, what's going on, guys? Today, I'm going to reveal the secret to building 3D Deathstar Delts. Now, this isn't some clickbait BS, I promise. This is something that like 98% of you won't be super aware of, but can have a huge impact on your entire physique, really, but particularly your shoulders and the ability to get that round, capped off look. All right, so why should you listen to me? Because my delts used to suck. Here's a picture of me when I was 19 years old. No lateral delt width at all. Pecs, front delt, but no 3D look at all. Here I am at 23. Same thing going on. Now, once I started to understand this secret that I'm about to reveal to you, this is what happened another 4 years later. All of a sudden, my delts are popping. They become one of my strongest body parts. Here I am competing against a 220-pound heavyweight at 190 pounds, and I'm really holding my own in part because of that really impressive delt popping to the side. And now it's probably the body part that I get asked about the most, maybe calves. And they ask me about calves, I don't know what to say because I don't do shit for calves. But I do know the secret to building delts, okay? So what is this big secret? Is this some kind of like unique, specific exercise? No. Is it some kind of intense, crazy, advanced training technique? No. Because the truth is, neither of those things will have much of an impact if you don't have this. Is it trend? Not gonna lie, trend kind of does fit the bill here, huh? And it can help you cap off your delts. However, in my opinion, it's not really worth the crippling paranoia, the relentless insomnia, or the torrential night sweats that happen if you actually do manage to fall asleep. So no, I do not recommend going that route. No, here it is. The secret to building a pair of cannonball delts is, my shitty drum roll, maximizing the degrees of freedom that your scapula has to move on the surface of your thorax. Okay, so I know scapulothoracic mobility isn't a particularly exciting or sexy topic, but once you can understand and apply this concept, you'll really be able to set your physique apart aesthetically from the average gym bro by being able to really develop all three heads of your shoulders and get that 3D look. I mean, think about it. How much more impressive is an arm if it's not just like one big thing, but you can actually see that delt popping out from the side with clear separation from the biceps and triceps. There's a reason that is an impressive look. It's because it's not something you see all that often. Pretty much anybody can build up their biceps if they're consistent in the gym for a couple years. All that is just elbow flexion. It's pretty hard to fuck that motion up. You're gonna be able to drive tension there no matter what. The guy who works on my car, he said he works out like once a month. He's got great biceps. So you can kind of just stumble your way to decent arms, but not to impressive, fully developed shoulders. And I say fully developed because front delts are often overdeveloped, or they're not that hard to build compared to lateral and rear delts, and those are the ones that are responsible for creating that 3D illusion. So why is it that our biceps, front delts, and I'd also throw traps in there, why are they easier to build up than our lateral delts and our rear delts? Well, most bodybuilders are so compressed that they lack the necessary amount of scapulothoracic mobility to maximize tension to these areas. Whereas biceps, traps, and front delts, they don't require as many degrees of freedom that the scapula has to move on the thorax. Okay, so let me break that statement down a little bit. I'm going to use a little bit of a visual aid and some help from my man, Zach Couple. So we did a podcast covering some of this stuff. So if this interests you, definitely check that out. I'll try to put the little thing in it somehow.
Normally, as we breathe in and breathe out, the rib cage should expand in all directions during the inhalation and get smaller or compress in all directions during the exhalation.
So when I say bodybuilders are compressed, this is exactly what I mean. Their rib cage is literally squished from front to back, and they lose that cylindrical, that's such a hard word to say, cylindrical shape that is necessary. So if this is where you're walking around, that's your normal, you might only be able to expand just like a little bit. You're not gonna hit that full expansion. And when you can't do that, that's not gonna allow your scapula to move over the surface of your thorax, because your scapula is a concave bone, right? So think about like this shape. It needs a convex surface to move on effectively. So we need our thorax to keep its shape. We need our rib cage to keep that cylinder shape. I'm not gonna even try again. And what happens is as we flatten out our back and we lose that, now that scapula, it can't glide effectively. And also what happens is the musculature that is in that upper middle back area becomes what's called concentrically oriented. And that just makes it not want to yield those. It makes those harder to let go. So essentially the scapula is going to have a tougher time moving away from the midline of the spine, moving laterally on the thorax. So why does this happen? Well, compression is going to be necessary just to produce large amounts of force. So some of it is absolutely welcome. You're going to have it. What happens though is a lot of people really overdo it in order to produce more force. They sacrifice their integrity of their rib cage and pelvis alignment by throwing the rib cage up. They over retract, over arch on just about every single move they can at the gym. Think about any kind of a chest press. A lot of people over flare, over squeeze. Think about a barbell row, over arch, over squeeze. A squat on your back, arch and squeeze, like flies. Everything that bodybuilders do, they kind of resort to that position. And then when you do that, and that's all you do, you teach your body to kind of start eliminating other options to become more effective of what you're asking of it. And that's what happens that causes us just to get stuck in that position, which is going to really limit the range of motion available to you and the ability to put effective tension on your lateral and rear delts, directly limiting your ability to add tissue there. So how do we address this? Through something called posterior expansion.
Or compress in all directions during the exhalation. That's not just the front of the rib cage, the pump handle, or the sides of the rib cage, the bucket handle, but also the backside or posterior aspect of the rib cage. This posterior and superior.
That is literally what this entire video is about, is getting that posterior expansion of that upper dorsal rostral, upper middle back area. That's everything I'm trying to get across in that video. That is what it looks like visually.
Superior movement of the rib cage, called posterior expansion or dorsal rostral expansion, also must happen in the ribs. Well, what if you can't do that?
If you can't do that, no 3D delts for you, and you're probably going to be dealing with pain and nagging injuries. You know, I was actually going to buy that rib cage model to do this video myself. That thing was like 420 bucks. Can you believe it? It's like so tiny. Anyways, all right, so let's take a look at what are considered the 6 movements of the scapula, although in reality, this is not technically the case. Actually, there are like 6 motions available for the scapula at the AC joint, and then there are 4 translatory motions they can take over the thorax. So what you're seeing here are just common representations of different combinations of those put together. Okay, but for the purposes of this video, let's just go off of this, and it's fine for what I'm trying to get across. And I think most of you guys will have some kind of a frame of reference for these shoulder girdle motions, okay? All right, so we have elevation, we have depression, we have protraction, we have retraction, we have upward rotation, and we have downward rotation. And like I said, keep in mind, these are all different combinations of motions. So I could have retraction with more elevation or more depression. I could have upward rotation with the different amounts of protraction, different amounts of retraction as well. So everything's variable. It's always on a spectrum. Now, when we look at all the literature on scapulothoracic function and scapulohumeral rhythm, we really see a couple common themes across different dysfunctions regardless of what the specific issue is. Okay, so the main things that we see are, number 1, early elevation. So if we are trying to go through flexion, we'll elevate earlier than would be natural with the normal scapulohumeral rhythm. Okay, and if we elevate early, that's our trap. So that's taking tension off of the delts. So again, if we're compressed, we're going to run out of options. We're going to want to elevate more. The second common characteristic we see across all of the different kinds of scapular thoracic pathologies is increased movement towards the midline of the spine and decreased protraction. So this is really big. That means it's harder to get your scapula to go outside your body. It wants to pull inward. So again, this could be really taken away from your lateral delts, can really take away from your rear delts. For example, you won't be able to get really good shoulder extension. Instead, you'll immediately kind of retract and use those mid-traps, maybe some rhomboids, instead of really getting your delts to start that move. And if we can't get our scapula to move effectively away from the midline of our spine, it's gonna be hard to really isolate tension on the delts. And the last common thing that we see is altered upward rotation patterns. So this goes two ways. So if you're more flexed forward, you're going to have less upward rotation than is normal. And if you're extended and arched in the back, you're going to have more upward rotation than is normal. And both of those situations are going to take away tension from your delts. And speaking of that, since I kind of talked about this rounded forward, if you present like that, you still need this expansion that we're talking about. Even if it doesn't look physically the same as like someone's here, you still don't have segmental expansion. You're just squished, and then you've tried to manage gravity a little different way. You have different strategies, but you're still flat and you're just like oriented over differently. So don't think that the stuff we're going to cover doesn't apply to you, because it does. Okay. All right, so let's take a quick little look at the scapula itself, and it is this lateral border right here that is more compressed and closer to the spine. This medial border has a little more space, so it's got a little more option to it in terms of motion. That's why this lateral border does not move well away from the spine. And these motions that you see here, these are actually the 6 real motions I was talking about. And even though we didn't really cover it, another common dysfunction is missing posterior rotation of the scapula. And that will also take a lot of tension off your delts. But I don't want to break that down that deep, but that is like the ability to kind of pull the bottom of your scapula against your back. All right, so if we just look at the actual motion of shoulder abduction, we can see that we need a good amount of upward rotation to go with that. For the first 30 degrees or so of abduction, we don't need really any scapular movement, but it's important to know that the supraspinatus really does the bulk of the work through there. The first 15 degrees is really all supraspinatus, and then it still helps a lot in that early range. So if you don't have good scapulothoracic mechanics and you don't glide outside effectively, maybe you'll elevate, maybe you'll do some kind of compensation, so you won't get but like 10 degrees of range on your actual shoulder before you start taking tension off of that. So just an example of why it's important to have good scapulothoracic mobility. Now, once we get above 30 degrees, now we need that upward rotation to kick in, all right? And then as we go above 90 degrees, now we need a whole lot of it, okay? So that is what it looks like if everything is functioning well. And this is just that animation with a little bit of the muscles involved, and you can kind of see if this is really compressed and this is really what I call concentrically oriented, it's going to not let that scapula move away from the body as effectively. And then we're probably going to end up with an elevation combined with retraction. Okay, so this is just to contrast the shoulder abduction with shoulder flexion, just to the front. So you can see as we're going to the front, it's a lot less requirements from the scapula, especially for upward rotation. For the first 60 degrees of shoulder flexion to the front, your scapula really doesn't have to do much at all. It's only above that 60 degrees that we need a little bit of upward rotation to start. I don't think this model was like totally perfect. I think it should have started a little sooner. But it's a lot less requirements from your scapulothoracic mobility to be able to really load those front delts, which that's a reason why to maybe move in the forward plane with your palms down if you are tight to get tension, because you will get good lateral delt tension too if your palms are down. So a lot of times if I have someone who's really compressed and they're just like squeezing too much, I'll just have them reach forward a little bit more, and they're still going to get good lateral delts just because they don't have to get as much out of their upper rotation capacity. So before we get into the fun stuff, I wanted to show a couple of examples of what it looks like to have really good scapular control and really direct tension to your delts, and then some examples of what it looks like to be really compressed and lift with poor technique and very poor scapular control. So anytime I'm looking for examples of shitty technique, I know I can always turn to Dr. Mike, and he won't let me down. He provides such a shining example every time. And literally when it comes to any body part, really, I don't think I've ever seen him give good advice. All right, so this is what it looks like to lift with very little scapular protraction or abduction, and to really over recruit from your low traps and to over orient your sternum in an effort to bring up your arms. So what I mean is we can like lift up our arms with our delts if we can kind of like get our scapula to go far on the outside of our body. Like that, I'm not getting a lot from my traps doing that. Whenever you see this whole shoulder girdle like orient down and like the pecs come up, like you're using different musculature to hold up your arms from here versus there. And there's a reason Dr. Mike has no delts and he's got good traps. So this is not what I would recommend to teach your body how to really push tension to your delts. So this is not an exercise I would really even do at all, because I don't know why we want to really go like make the weight lighter when what would be more of a lengthened range to get more of a shortened range on it. Like, doesn't it make sense to just go heavier here and then like isolate the higher range through something else? Yeah, so I mean, if someone was doing this for just an upper back day, that's great. But if you're doing this for your delts, you're really missing out on getting a lot of tension directed there. This is what it would look like if you did want to do that movement, which I'm not even a fan of. This is a lot better technique. I'm gonna have a lot less going on with my low traps. You can see I'm not throwing my shoulder girdle. I'm really isolating tension. This is what it looks like from the back. And I'll show you some examples of what it looks like when it's bad. So you can see I'm really getting a lot of delts there. My scapula is not going nuts. You can see I'm keeping really good scapular control here. There's not a lot going on in this upper back area. I'm putting tension here. And as soon as I start to lose that stack and lose my integrity, and now I'm rotating my whole shoulder girdle back like Mike was, you can see that activation in this area, in this mid upper back. And that's the reason why Dr. Mike has the kind of physique that he does and looks the way that he does, with these really overdeveloped mid traps right here, but literally no delts to speak of at all. I mean, this is hilarious that he's like giving advice on how to grow delts. This guy next to him's got decent ones, but like nothing here. Like, at least he doesn't even try to enhance it or Adobe Photoshop it at all, but like shade or structure or something, bro. It's like, if I wanted to grow those, I would have to not work out my shoulders for like a month or two. Okay, so here's what it looks like just to like do a normal fly, I would say. That's typical, and that's not like terrible. That's kind of what I see on average. But if you can reach out and try to touch as far away while pulling that scapula against your sides and moving on the outside, you'll get way more. And then this would just be real shit. So that is super isolated. And let's look at that from the back again. Very minimal scapular movement. I kind of just set them on the outside. Now I'm getting more. You can see more musculature getting active here. And that's like the real shitty version. So there we go. And then this is an example of like for your rear delts. Like say you're on a machine fly, reverse machine fly. So if I want to isolate, I'm going to really reach forward and keep my stack. I'm not gonna squeeze super hard. Now I'm squeezing, but I'm still keeping a good stack. And now I've lost my rear delts because I've thrown my ribs. So there's kind of like three different versions on that. Really isolate it, fuller range right there with good form, and then losing my stack, and that's shitty form. So even when I go past just isolation, that's all good, that's fine. I'm still following a good scapulohumeral rhythm. I'm still getting some rear delts. I'm just not isolating them, which you don't always have to. So I'm trying to do that on this machine, and sorry for the glare, but you can kind of think about it the same thing. Here I'm going to really isolate these delts, really keep in tension there for as long as I can, and then I'll start to get a little bit more out of my mid back, but I'm still keeping a good stack, but I'm just getting a little bigger range, and then you'll see starting to lose the stack. Once I lose the rib cage, now I've lost tension on the rear delts. So that would be right here. Yeah, so now I've lost any rear delts. So all that other stuff before is all good, just varying degrees of isolation, okay? So this is one of my absolutely favorite moves for my delts, for my lateral and my rear delts, okay? But a lot of people won't get the benefit of this because they won't be able to do it correctly. And so first thing I'm gonna do is I'm kind of like push those shoulder blades outside my body again. I'm not gonna round forward, I'm just gonna set them outside. And again, I'm gonna really reach up on this one. I'm trying to get more upward rotation with a little bit of abduction, a little bit of protraction. And I can get that full range as long as I keep my stack, and that's fine. Lost my stack, I lost my rear delts. I'm gonna bring it back, I'm gonna isolate them again, I think. There we go, now I've isolated those lateral and rear delts again. So you can see just different degrees of control. And like I said, it's just good to have options. It's not that one thing is exactly right necessarily. There are some things that are exactly wrong, I think. Anytime you throw away your stack willingly, you're fucking up. But the main issue is you're limiting your options by that being the only thing you ever do. So here's an example of a front delt, and I can feel really good tension there. When I arch, I lose it. Okay, so I want to keep that stack. A lot of times people think that, just because I maybe move something further away anatomically, like this, that it's like a bigger stretch, but that's not the way the body works. There's a lot of dynamics going on. It's not point A to point B means bigger stretch. There's fluid dynamics. There's your rib cage changes things. It's not as simple as that. You're actually gonna get a better stretch every single time if you keep somewhat of a stack. And so this one's huge. People do this and they just fucking die. When I do this one with people, I don't need to use hardly any weight, and they really feel this right away on those front and lateral delts. This is one of my favorite moves. Okay, so I just want to show you an example what it looks like doing shoulder flexion and getting traps involved to like an exaggerated degree into what it looks like to really isolate your delts a little bit more. So I'm really getting more delts on these. You can see very little going on with the scapula. It is coming down a little bit, but now as I arch and I start moving that whole shoulder girdle down, now it's like a totally different move. Like right there, holding that in that position, I'm not getting a ton of delts. If I were to go upright and push that forward, that would be like incredibly heavy for me to do it at that angle. So just because you can produce more force does not mean that we're putting tension where we want to be. Remember, we're bodybuilders, we're not powerlifters. There's a reason powerlifters all look the same. They kind of look like Dr. Mike as well, because they all lift with the same technique with that shitty like extension, but they need to. They have to hit crazy ranges of motion with really high levels of force. So that is the only way to do that. We're trying to build the best physique possible. Those aren't the same thing. All right, and this also applies to presses. I see people press wrong all the time. They press from this overly squeezed position back here. They're bleeding tension everywhere. You wanna exhale, bring those forward, get that scapula to press against your body. It's gonna be heavier. It's okay for this to feel heavier. Again, usually when I train someone on shoulders and they've never done shoulders with me, they are like fucking smoked. They cannot believe what the shit feels like. And then again, I'm gonna show you a little example of what this looks like from behind so you can see the scapular control. All right, so, and again, sometimes I do behind the neck presses and I'm pretty squeezed. I still am not like as squeezed as possible. I still have a little bit of posterior expansion going on, but if you were to do that every now and then, press super squeeze, it wouldn't hurt you. It's not what I recommend, but if you press this way with these shoulders really forward, so this would be retracted, but I press from here, I'm gonna get way more tension on those delts, those medial delts especially. You're gonna get less front delts, but like I said, it's pretty easy to build up your front delts compared to these sides. So let's take that trade. And then this is more squeeze, feels lighter. I could go heavier, but I feel less on what I want. Look at that scapular control. Everyone should have that. All right, so this is a movement that really shows the importance of being able to get that scapula to the outside of your body, because you can really get a good stretch. And I know a lot of you guys are like super stretch obsessed, which, stretch is important, but it's not everything. And if you can't get your scapula to glide outside, you won't be able to get that stretch. So you can see I'm really isolating delt here, that rear delt, a little lateral. And now I'm going to keep my stack, but I'm going to get a little bit more muscles involved, and that's fine. I still feel delt. As soon as I arch and lose it, now I no longer feel that delt. It's all here. Now it's back, and again, good to have options. All right, so here's an example of a rear delt row to really isolate your rear delts. Okay, so from this angle, you can see my scap is not jumping in too crazy. I'm getting a lot of tension right there. I feel tons of rear delt. I'm getting like a certain degree of scapular retraction. That's totally fine. That's normal. You won't be able to take that away. Now this is like a big full range. That's fine. I still feel pretty good delts. And then once I've lost that stack right here, I've lost all delt, all connection to my delt. So again, different degrees for what you want. A lot of times I'll kind of mix up different sets. I'll start here. Sometimes I'll do a drop set. Sometimes I'll do an extended set by adding more muscles involved. How do we know if we need posterior expansion? Okay, well, if you can't do any of the stuff I just showed you, then you need it, but let's look at 3 simple tests to show us. Okay, so first off, we have internal and external rotation of our shoulders. So what I would say we would look for as far as like bare minimums would be 90 degrees of external rotation and 45 degrees of internal rotation. So let's look at where I'm at, and this is before I did anything to loosen up. This is what I walked in with the other day. So that is my ER, my right side. That's a little over 90. That's fine. My IR, it's about 45 degrees. So I would say I'm kind of at about the minimum. I prefer to have a total degree of range of motion of about 150 degrees. So I kind of think of 90 and 45 the minimum for the individual, but I would like that total to be over 150. So I still want to get this a little improved for myself. And then if we look at the other side, I was actually like super restricted here with external rotation. That's not that normal for me lately. So what I wanted to show was I could tell I was restricted from this upper back posterior upper dorsal rostral area that we're talking about exactly. I could tell I was really restricted there. And as I was going back into this external rotation, I wanted to arch like that, and that would give me a fake representation. Okay, so it's really important to pay attention to that, because my body would have really easily gone to that arch and made me think I had more ER than I did. So if you present with like a lot of ER, you might be so compressed that you're in an extended position and don't even know it. So if you do that, you're gonna have really shitty IR measurements if you are really compressed. Okay, so you might think you have really good ER, but if your IR is just dog shit, then you know your ER is fake too. Okay, so if we look at my internal rotation, so that external rotation is about 80 degrees on there. My internal, I mean, that's normally better too. I would say that's 45, maybe 50 degrees. And then the final test, I would say, is this just kind of flexion test against the wall. All you're gonna do is just kind of put your fingertips on the wall behind you. And for most bodybuilders, I would say if you can just get your fingertips on with your elbows staying relatively straight without having to arch or go crazy, if you can just get to there, that's a good starting point. Eventually, you'd like to go up a little bit. So here I was. This is where I started. Fingertips on, not too flared, and I got a little bit up. So that was actually not terrible. I was actually pretty okay with it. So what I really did not like was my left measurements, my left internal, my left external rotation. Everything else I wasn't too terribly unhappy with. Okay, so how do we go about getting this posterior expansion? Okay, finally, this is the fun stuff. I'm just joking. This shit's not fun, but it's important. So we're gonna cover these moves in sequential order, okay? And they're all gonna be about breathing. I know they're boring and this stuff seems weird, but trust me, I wouldn't waste my time. I wouldn't invest so much money and time into this stuff if it didn't pay off. If it didn't pay off in terms of feeling good, as far as no issues whatsoever with your joints or anything like that, but also paying off in terms of looking aesthetic, having good muscle separation, and being able to really drive tension where you want. Okay, so these are all going to be boring breathing exercises, and the breathing pattern is very important. It's everything in this. Okay, when we breathe, we stretch our body from the inside out. We get rid of that squished position. We expand, like you saw Zach do with that $450 ribcage model. So for our breaths, we want to think long and soft. We don't want to be super forceful with our exhales. Think about a 4 to 8 second sigh out of your mouth. Okay. At the end of that, we'd like to feel a very, very little bit of abs. You shouldn't crunch down. You shouldn't lose any height as you exhale. You shouldn't lose any of that at all. When we inhale, we want to inhale silently through the nose, 4 to 8 seconds. Same concept. Don't gain any height. We want to expand from front to back, from 360 everywhere. We don't want to come up that direction, okay? So just keep that in mind with these. If you can't breathe in these positions, then nothing matters. The breathing is absolutely key to getting this expansion. All right, so I'm gonna let my man Zach cover the first one. All right, so let's check out this first one. This is just a sideline breathing move, and this would be the very first step you would take.
If muscles are tight on the front and back of the rib cage, it'll limit your shoulder mobility. We can loosen up these muscles by opening up the front and back of the rib cage. Lying on a yoga block sideways squeezes the rib cage left to right. This opens up the ribs on the front and the back, getting those muscles to chill and improving your shoulder mobility.
I mean, that move in itself doesn't seem like much. I've seen some crazy shape changes and things happen off of that. Just the other day, I had a guy doing that who had such poor hip flexion in his left side. He had like maybe 70 degrees, 65 degrees. All we did was do that on one side. He went back down. He had like 95 degrees. Everything looks so much better. So when you're so squished, it's best to start on your side just to let gravity help, because we got fluids and things in us that can help like create that shape that we want more on one side. So first step is always going to be sideline breathing. The second step is going to be getting these abs to like chill out. Every bodybuilder has way too tight of abs, okay, because they don't use relative motion, and so they actually have really strong abs. So if you have back pain, it's almost never because you got a weak core. It's usually because your abs, your core sometimes is overactive, and it makes you move in a way that doesn't disperse movement in a relative motion kind of way. And it's really hard to get air to come from the bottom up, which is how it has to, and expand the lower ribs and get to the upper ribs if the stomach is so tight that it doesn't allow that to transfer and allow what we call a 360 expansion to occur. So this is a move that's really easy to do wrong, okay? So you really can't feel any back. All you're doing is you're giving yourself a little bit of passive support, and you're just focusing on really big inhales through your nose, but silent and soft, but long. Focusing on feeling that stretch around your belly button and your whole ab area. And so when some people are really tight, this can make a huge difference as well. I've seen some crazy changes on that. And a lot of times if you're real tight, you'll get like shaky. So again, we need about 4 to 8 breaths, maybe 1 to 2 cycles for all of these, okay? And so that is going to be the second thing we do. We have a sideline, then we go to our abdominal stretch, our diaphragmatic breathing from that position, and then we would move to tabletop. And this is going to give us that posterior lower rib expansion. Then we're also going to get some anterior expansion. So this whole video is about posterior expansion, but you guys are going to need some anterior expansion as well. And you're going to get a lot of that with some of these as well. So don't worry about that. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of play with this setup. So I think I'm going to start with just kind of a very neutral position where I'm getting, like I said, posterior lower ribs and anterior expansion. I'm keeping pressure on the outer part of my palm under my pinky and the inner part under my index finger. That's really important as well. And I'm getting those good breaths. So now I think I'm going to change this. And I'm going to go really kind of press and contract the front area. So now I'm really getting a lot more posterior expansion. I'm kind of biasing this more towards that area by making the front musculature tight. So when something's tight or contracted or concentrically oriented, it doesn't expand. Okay, so now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to contract this back musculature and get front expansion. So again, you can play around with it. Most of you guys will need both. At a certain point, you might need more of one than the other. So these are some different options. All right, you can also go one hand to make this a little bit tougher. And one more variation I'll do sometimes is this externally rotated underhand position. So whenever you go external rotation in the humerus, you're going to go internally rotate from the scapula. It's going to move further away from your spine so you can get better dorsal rostral expansion. You can also come up with your knees to make it a little more challenging on your core. So just a little progression, that is fine as well. And then one more variation I do for my clients. I don't do it for myself as much because I've got pretty good activation here. Is I use the band. So again, you saw me pull those traps down. So it's all about low lat, low traps. I'm going to pull those suckers down and breathe through there. Sometimes I'll come up with knees. It's pretty challenging. This is also a great bench press prep as well. All right, so this is another move that's going to help with just all over posterior expansion. We're working our way up the back. This is going to help with that mid back. Still going to get some posterior lower ribs, but this also may get a little bit of dorsal rostral expansion as well. So you're just going to lean over, palms facing you, making sure that we apply like a little force down and forward, just very slightly with those elbows. You don't want to feel anything going on with your necks and traps, and you're just focusing on getting this area to expand on those inhales. Can we see it? Yeah, you can see a little bit there. All right, so that's probably about as far as most of you guys will get for a couple weeks. I don't recommend going to this next step unless you are pretty much at those mobility markers that I gave you earlier, the 90 ER, the 45 IR, and being able to get your fingertips on the wall. So once you can get to there, then you can try this, okay? So we've got air through the lower posterior ribs, we got it through the belly now, we got a little anterior expansion. Now we want to get that area between the shoulder blades, that upper rib cage area. So we need to invert ourselves to do that most effectively. So this is one easy way to do that. And it's all about the breaths and all about making sure your spine is neutral. So some people need to tuck more, some people need to extend more to get their spine neutral, depending on what your kind of orientation strategy is. So I'm feeling that. You can literally see it expand as I inhale. Yeah, right there. And I felt that really good. Here's another move we can do inverted. This is an all four belly lift, a little progression. Same thing we did on our knees, but now we're on our feet, even tougher. So again, don't do these if you can't breathe right through them or if you lose your spine neutrality. So another good move is just to hang, and you can just hang from the bar, or you can do a little squat like this. And this is supposed to help a lot with anterior expansion, which should give you more IR, but what I see is most bodybuilders are just so tight in their pecs and all this musculature up here that doing this actually gives them really good ER, good external rotation. So I recommend doing this. You don't need to hit those minimums I mentioned earlier for this. You can just throw that in there too. And so you can also adjust it and move back a little bit if you don't have that amount of shoulder flexion available to you. So I just did all that. I recorded everything I did, okay? I only did it one round through, and these are the changes that I got. So my external rotation on my right, a little better, maybe 5 degrees better, a little smoother, but that was fine before. It really wasn't an issue. I was more concerned with my internal rotation. So I'd say I'm about 95 on my ER, and now my IR went from 45 to, that's good. That's probably 55, 60. So I'm over that combined 150 degrees of total shoulder excursion that I was looking for, so I'm happy with that. When we look at the other side, that is a huge difference. You remember how I was only like 80 degrees, my back wanted to arch, and this, it just flopped back, felt good, I didn't have to think about it. So I'd say I'm about 95 or even 100 degrees on here now. And my IR was about 45, maybe 50 degrees. Now I'm at 55, so again, these are really good changes. I'm really happy with both of those. My shoulder flexion test was already okay, so I really wasn't worried about that, so I didn't do that again. But one thing you want to pay attention to when you're doing these is there a big disparity from one side to the other? So if you notice that your left side just has so much less external rotation compared to your right side, and your right side has so much less internal rotation compared to your left, you're probably falling in what's called a brachial chain pattern, and you need to address that after you've already done all that other stuff. So a lot of people are in what's called like a pec pattern, meaning they're just extended, and they wouldn't really fall in what's called a BC pattern. But once they lose some of those outer layers of compensation, then you probably will present with this asymmetrical brachial chain pattern. I did a lot. I'm not now, but I worked on this for a long time. So I'm going to show you 3 moves to do if you do present with this, and this will help make sure that you develop your shoulders evenly, because shoulders can be kind of funky looking. They can get wonky and pretty asymmetrical if your scapula is really far away from your body on one side and really close on the other. So if you present like you have a BC pattern, then this is one of the moves I would do. This is a right sideline apical expansion move from PRI. And I'm really posted up on this right hand, trying to feel these ribs, intercostals stretch right here, the lat, this whole right side of my trunk. I'm going to push down with both knees the whole time. And as I inhale, reach forward very gently with the left arm. I don't want to make any kind of like rotation or close my chest down at all. As you exhale, you're going to just sink harder onto that right hand. So you should be feeling your right ribs stretching and your left ribs kind of closing down. Again, 4 to 8 breaths, 1 to 3 times or so. This next move is just a variation of the tabletop. We're going to elevate the left hand just a little bit to help push those ribs back. Those are the ones that are flared more. If we can push them back and teach our body to breathe through there in a good pelvic position, you can really reset some things. So that's it. You're just going to come out of there. You can do the same thing. You could lift up your knees. You could also even do push-ups from this position as well. And then finally, this is another move from PRI. What we're going to do is first we want to make sure we have our foot contact. So we're going to keep the inner points of our heel and under the big toe flat without losing the outer. I hope I fixed this. That doesn't look that good. And then with this left arm, what we want to do is reach down towards the foot, not quite on the ground, a little higher. And the right arm, we want to reach overhead, try to get upper rotation. We also want to get a little bit of this left side bend right here. You see, I just turned a little bit to the side. I closed those ribs down. You can't see that good. I just literally did that a little bit. And so I'm going to take those good breaths through here. And this is a really good one. This one always helps me a lot if I am a little bit off. You can visually see the difference afterwards. So I'm getting that left serratus and low trap, right low trap as well. All right, luckily there are some other things we can do as well to get posterior expansion that are a little less boring. These are some actual like strength training exercises that also promote expansion, so they're great to do either as a warm-up or as part of your actual programming. So this is one of my favorites. This is a deep squat. It's better on wedges. What you can do on this is you could do 2 arms together, or you could do one. What you want to make sure is we don't see any concentric activity from here. Focus on the inhale as the hands go back. Really big inhale. Think about that moving back in space. But what I like to do on this is one hand at a time. I'll bring them up with both, and then I'll lower one at a time and inhale. And as you do that, you'll naturally turn into the side that's up a little bit. And that turn gives you a little more space between the scapula and the spine on that side, so to promote more posterior expansion on each side as that arm goes down. So I really like this one a lot. It can help really get some expansion, and you get to build up your bis. This is one of my absolute favorite preps. You can see I'm getting a real good stack. That's actually a really good example of like what a stack looks like. Most people just crunch around. You can see I'm giving that cylinder shape right there. There we go. All right, so I've got to get my foot context. I got a ball between there. I'm not going to lose my pelvis. I'm feeling a shit ton of hamstrings. Inhaling as it goes over, really making sure I don't overly flare that rib. Exhaling as I come up, trying to close down that rib. And I get sore in my hamstrings every time I do this exercise. One of the best movement preps you can do. This is going to give you a lot of anterior expansion. And as you're going overhead, you're really thinking about that scapula pushing up and against your spine. You don't want any kind of like retraction. Just reach really long. All right, so we made it, guys. Again, I know this isn't the most exciting video. It's hard to make super interesting, but this is a concept that can really improve your aesthetics. Like I said, everyone envies that look when they see you walking around. They can just see that delt head popping off from the side and from behind. So hopefully you can take this information and apply it to your own workouts. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns at all, let me know below. Also, I had like a ton of content that I was going to put in here from Dr. Mike, because I found a really good video of him working out with some buddies, and it shows a great comparison and contrast of different degrees of this kind of compression. But I decided to make that his own video because I think I can like kind of break it down a little more in depth that way without having to make just one super long one. So be on the lookout for that, and it'll really make a lot of sense after having seen this one. So I appreciate it, guys. Thank you.